All right, welcome to this workshop on how to determine a target market. Thanks for coming, everyone. I know you're all like tired of Zoom lectures, so I'm gonna keep this workshop short, but hopefully still informative and helpful, especially for those of you on Innovate projects teams. Okay, before we get started, here's the check-in code for the event. I'll leave that up for a second, so you guys can check in on the membership portal and get the check-in points. And I can also drop a link. Checking. Yeah, oh, Stephen got it. Okay. Yeah, that's the link for quick checking as well. And then the checking code is going to be on all the slides. So don't worry if you like miss it now. But okay. So let's get started. We're going to have this whole discussion on like how to identify a target market. So before we go too far, I just want to make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page about what a target market even is. So the name is, of course, pretty suggestive of its definition. So it's quite straightforward. A target market is essentially a specific group of consumers who you plan to sell your product to and are the focus of your marketing efforts. So the emphasis here is on specific because like when you create a new product, you can almost like, it's really rare, but almost never justifiably say that your target market is just everyone. And so like I think a major miscalculation that people make when they're building new products, especially in software, is that like they just put very little focus on market research and just feel that their their product is just going to be applicable to their market is just like everybody. But there'll usually be a way to narrow down your market to something a little more specific. And like, I mean, I guess you might point to Amazon and say like their target market is pretty close to everybody. And you know, that may indeed be the case, but it's also true that it took them what 20 to 25 years to reach this point. So like when they started out, as you may have seen in the how to build an MVP workshop, they were just like exclusively an online bookseller. And so they weren't like the e-commerce giant selling tons of different products to everyone that they are today. And so this was in like what 1994, 95, when Amazon was starting out. So e-commerce wasn't that big as a whole, and the number of people that were looking to specifically buy books online was really not that high. So their target market was actually pretty niche when they started out, and that shows that even like Amazon, like who you think of as targeting everybody today, they didn't really start out by claiming that their target market was everyone. They kind of grew to that point. And so you might be thinking that trying to be more specific in the target market is like not a good thing, but it's like, I guess it's just a perception that being specific means you sell your product to fewer people, but it's actually kind of key to building a successful product. And so that brings me to the importance of identifying a target market for your product. So one of the biggest reasons for identifying a target market is that it allows you to better tailor your product to your consumers' wants and needs. And so like there are very few products out there that, you know, are actually appealing to everyone. So if you simply claim that your market is everyone right from the get-go, you'll kind of find it tough to find a group of people that really want to buy your product, and you might actually end up with some fleeting interest across a variety of different groups, as opposed to a really loyal or strong customer base when you're starting out. And so, in addition to that, identifying a target market kind of lets you grab the attention of the right people, because like as I just mentioned, your new product likely doesn't fit the needs of everybody. And so the target market, like your target market that you define, is going to be the group of people that are like most likely to buy your product. And so you want to be able to gear your product and marketing efforts toward them, because they're going to have the highest likelihood of actually purchasing the product or using it in whatever situation. And so related to that, it kind of determining your target market kind of helps you be more cost efficient, because this is, I guess, you kind of know that marketing resources are and purchasing ads is really like quite expensive. And so you don't want to be too vague in who you target with your marketing message. Um, and so you kind of want to identify a target market. And by doing so, you're picking out a group that your product would fit well. And that way you can get the most out of your marketing dollar because and that's really crucial when you're just starting off and don't have much capital to be throwing around at marketing resources. And then finally, identifying a specific target market can help you compete with like larger and more established products because like a high level of specificity in your target market lets you focus on a smaller group of your competition's market. And in that way, you can sort of better understand that group and better serve them to build up that loyal customer base and really establish your product in the market. And that kind of relates to what I was talking about earlier with regards to, tailoring your product to consumers' wants and needs. So now that we've sort of established the importance of identifying a target market for your product, I'm gonna go through some strategies you can use to actually like identify who your target market is. The ones I'm gonna go through are probably not the complete list of strategies you could use, and they're not gonna be always perfect for your situation, but they're typically the most popular strategies that are suggested for target market identification. And I feel that they're in general pretty widely applicable. So they're a pretty solid way to get started and get at least some level of refinement in your assessments of your target market. So the first strategy we'll look at is, well, using your intuition. This kind of requires starting off by knowing your product's defining features. And so you have to consider these features in the context of the problem that your product is aiming to solve in order to figure out what benefits the consumers would get by buying or using your product. So there's an important distinction that should be made between um, features and benefits. So features are things that like automatically come with your product, whereas benefits are essentially like how the feature actually helps the consumer and like what positive impact it has on them. So I think a common example of features versus benefits comes from the first iPod. So one of the features of the first iPod was I think like one gigabyte of MP3 file storage, and so, I mean, that's not much by today's standards, but the way Apple advertised it at the time was like by phrasing it in terms of the benefit that it brought to the consumer. And in that case, it was that the consumer could store up to, around 1,000 songs on their iPod or whatever. And so they could take, like they advertised it as like you could take all your favorite songs with you on the go. And so describing features can help you like sell your product, but I think it's the benefits that are really what motivate people to buy the product because they kind of want to know how their purchase, like they're spending money on it. So how their purchase is actually going to positively impact their lives. And so once you know the features of your products, then you can kind of use your intuition to think about who would appreciate the benefits that come with those features the most. And in doing so, you'll end up identifying certain groups of people that your product ends up fitting the best. And this is like a really good first step toward identifying a specific target market that you want to pursue based on like the features of your product. And again, this really centers around you like really knowing your product and being able to determine particular features and benefits that you feel will really make your product worth using. So we'll go to an example of this and we'll look at Tesla. I think most, if not all of you, are familiar with Tesla. And if not, I guess you can give it a quick search. But to start off, I just want to kind of ask those of you that are here, like, what do you think are some of the main features of like a Tesla, I guess Model S we could talk about? Feel free to unmute or respond in the chat. I'll just give you a bit to think about it and respond.
You said features, right?
Yeah,
I guess one of the big things is self-driving.
yeah.
That like is pretty unique to Tesla.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I mean it's a really good one. So I guess like a couple of the main features um, of a Tesla are obviously like the fact that it's an electric vehicle. It has like whatever, I don't know, I forgot what it is, like 100 kWh,
Oh
like
yeah, yeah.
350-volt lithium ion battery, something like that. It has like a really big battery, right? And then obviously, like you mentioned, it's has the self-driving capabilities and yeah, like Steven said, the safety features as well, like lane drift prevention and stuff like that. And so um, we can kind of start thinking about some of the benefits that correspond to these features. So based on the features that I kind of mentioned, the main benefits I was thinking of were like consumers don't have to fill up gas, so it's more cost effective over time, right? And then the large battery capacity gives the car a great range of around 390 miles. And so thinking about who that would sort of benefit the most, this would be really good for someone who's more cost conscious and like commuting working professionals who are just naturally have to drive a lot, right? And then you can also think about uh, like the fact that the car has no greenhouse gas emissions and like some of you mentioned, features like autopilot and like lane assist, things like that, right? And so that would be helpful for a more environmentally conscious crowd and people who tend to sometimes, I guess, be more distracted while driving. I don't know if that's a good way to phrase it, but uh, like both of these kind of characteristics, environmentally conscious and like distracted drivers, I guess, typically apply to a younger audience or a younger group of people. And so indeed, if you like if you take a look at like a sort of a breakdown of a lot of Tesla buyers, you'll kind of see that indeed a large portion of the Tesla buyers are younger working professionals. And so that kind of fits what we just kind of defined based on the features and benefits of a Tesla. And so this kind of suggests that Tesla has indeed identified them as a target market. And then if you were to dig even deeper into the Tesla sort of buyer demographic, you would also see that Tesla buyers are typically working in tech-related industries, which is an even more specific target market, right? And so this could be because like those people find the abundance of software in Tesla cars appealing, or um, you know, like things like the large touch screen, like a lot of it supports many apps and games. It also could be like a key characteristic of the target market because Teslas are not super cheap, you could say. And so there's a certain like income level that is needed to buy a Tesla. And that income level is, you know, often found among people who work in tech. And so those are kind of additional ways you can think about how the target market is refined in that sense. It becomes more specific. The next strategy I want to discuss is like examining your existing customers. And now you might think that you won't have any customers soon after you launch your product, and this might indeed be true. If that is the case, then obviously the strategy wouldn't really apply to you. But I think more often than not, you will have some people using your product pretty early on, even if it's just like a few people. And so if your product falls into this larger category of like you have some number of users, then I think the strategy could still be useful for you. So this also kind of shows the importance of launching your product as early as possible with your MVP or whatever. And I think this was something that was discussed in the How to Build an MVP workshop. And it's important because like by launching your product early, you're giving your product more time for potential users to actually find it and like become sort of early users of your product. Right. And so in that way, you're more likely to have at least some users by the time you are trying to determine your target market and really grow your product. But anyways, if you have some early users, it's important to sort of analyze who your users are and figure out some of the characteristics of the group. And so this includes things like demographics, which are typically characteristics like age, gender, income, location, maybe education, occupation, all sorts of stuff like that is pretty common. And then there's also psychographics, which is more about users' habits and behaviors and like lifestyles that they live. And then there's also motivations for using your product specifically. And this can obviously be related to psychographics and like I guess like the lifestyle might motivate them to use your product or whatever. And so for this process of determining these characteristics of your existing users, user interviews are pretty key. Last week's workshop, I think, talked about user interviews. And so that's like a good place to start if you want to think about doing user interviews. But essentially conducting user interviews in this context can help you get a sense of not only demographics, which are pretty easy to ask for in like a survey or whatever, like a pretty simple survey, but also like perhaps more importantly, psychographics and motivations for using your product can be conveyed through user interviews because those aren't always things that are easy to convey in, I guess, like a simple survey or short answer response or something like that. It's more about I guess it's more easily conveyed in a context of a face-to-face meeting and sort of discussion about your product and how they use it, things like that. So once you have sort of gauged your target market or your market of existing users and figured out some of these characteristics, you can start looking for trends in the info about the characteristics that you found. And these will include like trends in age or income or something like that, right? And then these characteristic trends can identify segments of the market that um, that your product fits, and in that sense, it can quickly point you in the direction of a more specific target market for your product. Now, I will also add that this is not something that you can only do once when you're launching your product and then just like stop doing it after that, I guess. You can like as your startup grows, you can and your product will probably evolve over time too. You can constantly be evaluating your existing customers and see if your target market is shifting over time, I guess, which is entirely possible. And so you can kind of think about whether or not you want to take your marketing resources in a new direction based on a potentially evolving customer profile over time. So for an example of this, let's look at Starbucks. So initially, Starbucks was pretty popular among older working professionals trying to get their cup of coffee in before or during work or whatever, right? However, in more recent times, you could say that like Starbucks has gained popularity among a younger crowd, and as a result, like examination of the characteristics of their customer base led Starbucks to sort of shift their target market to that younger group of people, and this includes, high schoolers, college students, as well as younger working professionals. And so the shifting target market that Starbucks is going after is kind of apparent in the way that Starbucks has changed their products and services. So for one thing, many of their locations have been remodeled to create a more contemporary look, I guess. They also have Wi-Fi and they've been remodeled to have a layout that sort of promotes the ability to sit down at a single Starbucks location and get some work done with friends or something like that, like while enjoying one of their drinks or whatever, right? And then additionally, what Starbucks offers at many of their locations has become much more diverse, like the actual drinks and stuff that they offer. So instead of exclusively serving coffee, which is I think what they kind of started out doing, they've sort of expanded into like a bigger variety of drinks, and then as well as some like foods and pastries too. And this kind of helps, I guess, capture an audience that's not just looking for that not just looking for coffee when they go to Starbucks. And finally, you will see that people at Starbucks, you'll often see them coming in to pick up orders placed on the mobile app. And so this kind of shows that Starbucks is catering toward a more tech savvy on the go group of people. And all of these changes kind of fit the trend of a younger group of people, right? So it kind of shows that all these changes are geared towards younger people, which sort of matches the trend that you see in Starbucks customer profiles. Okay, the final strategy I'm going to talk about is examining your competition. So when you think of competing products, you probably think of them as a negative, but in some respects, competition can actually be a good thing. Like if there's an established product that you're competing with, then that usually means they will have like a well-defined target market as well. So you can analyze those competitors to get an idea of who they're targeting in their marketing efforts. And this can be done in a variety of ways. Like, for example, looking at like the types of marketing campaigns and ads that they run can sort of determine what group of people the marketing message seems to be geared toward. And then you could also look at like I guess some companies also offer like put out some sort of like reports about their marketing efforts and then kind of look at what demographics or psychographics that they're targeting as well. And so those can be helpful for identifying target markets as well, like of your competition. But this sort of goes back to the previous strategy of like, I guess, examining your customer base, but it's for characteristic trends, but it's sort of applied to your competition this time instead of yourself. And so in doing so, you can kind of get an idea of who your competition is targeting. You can kind of turn around and apply that to your own product because like your product is likely somewhat similar to competing products, which is why they would be competing products in the first place. And so because of that, your product likely serves a similar market to the competition as well. Of course, your product is not going to be exactly the same as competing products because if it is, then, well, I hate to break it to you, but you haven't done anything, right? In terms of bringing a new product to the market, and you probably won't succeed in like doing that approach of just copying other products for a variety of reasons. But assuming that your product is somehow different from the competition, you can sort of refine or alter what you found as the competitor's target market to fit what your product offers. And so again, think about like features and benefits. What features sort of distinguish your product from others? And then what benefits would a consumer get from those distinct new features, right? So considering this is sort of a good way to determine what sorts of alterations you would have to make to your competitors' target markets in order to come up with a target market that fits your own product. So for an example of this, we can look at Nike. So this might be a tough one, but does anyone know who Nike's main competition in the American market was like early on? Puma, that's a good guess. I think Puma was definitely a competitor. So was Adidas also. But like that's a good guess. But I think the answer is actually Reebok in the American market specifically. And so Reebok was an established shoe like outside the US. Yeah, yeah. So Reebok was an established brand outside the US, right? And then they got a license to distribute their shoes and products within the US in 1979. And so at this point, Nike was sort of like an emerging brand, but it was not nearly as big as it is today. And so with its casual athletic footwear, Reebok was targeting young athletes and those who were passionate about getting in shape through various physical exercise, right? And so Nike took notice of this growing market of people that Reebok was thriving off of, and then they decided to, pursue a very similar market. And that was apparent in their early Nike shoe models that emphasized like new shoe technology and comfort for everyday athletes who were just trying to like get in shape or just like, I guess, passionate about some certain sports or something like that, right? So at its core, like Nike's target market was pretty close to that of Reebok, and I think another example of like the comfort aspect that they went after was like Air Max, which was introduced I think around 1980s. I don't know, I could be wrong on that, but somewhere there about. That's again another like sort of makes it that's that again makes it sort of apparent that they were going after like everyday people who were just trying to like um, get in shape or whatever, or do whatever physical exercise they wanted to do, right? But then eventually Nike put their own twist on things and started putting more emphasis on design to make their shoes more like fashionable outside of fitness. And then in that sense, they could expand their scope to include more fashion-oriented people in their target market. So like I said, at its core, the target market that Nike initially went after was mostly determined by the market of their primary competitors, which was Reebok. But then the dramatic ascension of Nike to like the dominant force that they are today it didn't necessarily come from like Nike shifting their core target market. It was more so based on like how they marketed the product. And this is like a separate topic on marketing strategies as opposed to like the target market identification strategies that we're talking about. But essentially Nike sort of moved to make their products a cultural phenomenon and capitalized on like behavioral aspects of their market. And so in their advertising, they use messages like their famous "Just Do It," and then I think one of their first TV ads like had sort of imagery of everyday people like persevering through difficulties and pushing themselves in their athletic endeavors. So it wasn't in that sense, it wasn't like it wasn't focused on the product, like the shoe product itself. It was kind of more focused on the people that were using the product and like how it benefited them. Um, and so it kind of targeted again the everyday, it still kind of targeted the everyday people in their target market, and like the passion for athletics that those people displayed, it was what Nike kind of used in their advertising campaigns. And then the cultural phenomenon part sort of came from Nike's pursuit of celebrity athlete endorsements. Of course, probably the most significant move that Nike made to help their sales skyrocket was when they convinced Michael Jordan to sign as a brand ambassador and then ultimately create his own line of shoes with Nike. And then Nike obviously still continues with those major athlete endorsements today. But again, this is kind of more of a discussion on like marketing strategies as opposed to target market identification. So the main takeaway here is that like in some instances, it can be helpful to sort of analyze the competition's target market. And in that way you can, um, because your product is going to be pretty similar to your competitors, you can sort of you can sort of use that to come up with your own target market. And then you can refine that market that you identify for your competitors as you see fit based on like whatever unique twist or whatever new features that your product brings with it. Okay, so now that we've covered some of the main strategies used to identify a target market for your product, we can kind of move to a brief discussion on how you might actually reach them. And unfortunately for this question, there isn't really an answer that is like universally applicable, but instead it varies across different target markets, right? So it's really dependent on like those characteristics that we talked about earlier in the workshop, especially like habits and lifestyle that people in your target market tend to have. It kind of depends on that like to determine how you would actually reach them. Like I think a good example would be like a younger age target market versus an older age target market. Many younger people tend to use streaming services like Netflix or HBO Max or whatever to watch their shows and entertainment, whereas older people are more toward watching cable TV for their entertainment. And so the channels through which you might reach these audiences can vary. I know that most people in ACM are more interested in in tech related products. So I will say that I guess not always, but in general, new tech products typically have a younger, more tech savvy target market. And so because of this younger market, social media is often a good place to put your marketing resources because it's a good way to reach that market with your message about your product. And social media, like marketing tools, can even help you sort of target your specific market to see your ads or whatever other marketing campaign you create. But I will add that you should be somewhat careful with how you phrase your message for your target market because um, I guess many of us probably know from experience, right? Like ads that are extremely obviously like targeted at a specific consumer, like a specific user, can sometimes be sort of off-putting, and then that might actually reduce the person's inclination to sort of buy your products. So you should be a little bit like wary about how you would how you phrase ads and marketing campaigns. Now, the last thing I want to talk about today in relation to determining a target market is like how you should evaluate your decision, right? Because like I said earlier, you might not always get perfect results by using the strategies we discussed here. So it's important that you kind of reflect on the conclusions you make about your target market before really moving forward with it and really putting money into marketing toward that group. So there are some questions that you could ask about the target market you define that can sort of help you with this evaluation process. Like for one, are there enough people in your target market, right? If your market is just way too overly niche, then there might not be enough people in the market to make your product and startup as a whole sort of sustainable, because you won't be able to, like, you won't, even in general, you won't be able to reach everyone in your target market. And so if your market overall is just too small, then it might not produce enough sales or usage to, or whatever, to maintain it into the future. And then also you should consider whether or not your target market is easily accessible. And this is in terms of like, can your marketing efforts actually reach them? And so like I talked about in the previous slide, there isn't necessarily a way to always, like a single way to always reach your target market. But if you have a target market that's like, for example, of younger age, then you can probably reach them through social media, which is like I mentioned before. And so in that case, they might be like sufficiently accessible, right? So those are the kind of considerations you have to make in determining is your target market easily accessible? And then another question that I have listed here is like, can they actually afford your product? So if you go down the road of examining your existing customers to determine demographics and psychographics, then this question shouldn't really be too big of an issue for you, because um, like one of the things that you should be keeping track of when you're looking at demographics of your customers is their income. And so obviously people that are using your product will only be like buying it if they can actually afford it. So if you base your target market off of like your existing customers, then you'll likely end up targeting a group with an appropriate income to afford your product. And so affordability shouldn't become too much of a problem. But then like if you didn't have like existing users, you might not necessarily have gone down that road of examining your existing customers to determine your target market. And so in that case, it could very well be possible that you end up targeting a group that might not necessarily be able to afford your product simply based on like other characteristics. Um, and so in that case, it's important to do some research into the incomes of the people that tend to be in your target market, and that way you could determine like whether or not it would be reasonable for those people to actually buy your product at the price that you set, right? And then you have the control over like how to shift the price of your product to sort of align with the target market, or you can just um, you can think about shifting the target market itself to a different group of people that might be able to afford the product at the price that you have. Again, if you use social media as a channel for like your marketing campaign, they offer lots of analytics tools that can help you sort of do this research and evaluate how your marketing efforts are being received by the target market that you initially define. And then based on those analytics, it can help you sort of refine or alter your target market um, to better suit the people that you're going after. So like I just mentioned, there's some analytics tools that social media platforms provide when you're doing marketing campaigns on their platforms. And so these are just some of the links to marketing analytics tools that are offered by a few of the bigger social media companies. Like Facebook and Instagram use Facebook Business Suite. Twitter has Twitter Analytics. Google and YouTube have Google Analytics, and Spotify has Ad Studio Audience Metrics. And so I think there's also a non-native social media marketing analytics tool called like Social Bakers or something like that. Don't quote me on that. I think that's what it is. Um, but it's like an AI powered analytics tool that can help you see sort of all sorts of metrics about your marketing audience across social media platforms instead of having to use like a separate analytics tool for each platform that you're on in order to like in your marketing campaign. Right. I'm not too familiar with it, but anyways, if you're interested in some of these analytics tools, you can check them out when you have the time. All right. With that, I'm gonna wrap up this workshop. Like I said, try to keep it short. And so thank you again to all of you that are here. I hope you enjoyed the workshop or at least got something out of it. And I'll stick around for a bit longer to answer any questions you may have.